Now that we have a pretty good understanding of how retrieval augmented generation works, we can start to use it to help us with the different parts of research. We'll start by seeing how this can help us with one of the first major steps of the scientific process, finding and understanding literature. Today, we'll learn how we can use AI to revolutionize the literature review process. So when we're using AI to help us with our literature review, I think it's really important that we start with some of the basic skills that we already know. I think we need to find some papers and try to understand as much as we can before we use AI in order to get the most out of it. So I have three major steps that I want to cover today. The first one doesn't involve AI at all. The first step is finding a paper, reading the paper, and just taking a couple of notes, maybe just like a couple of bullet points. I'll give you an example of a paper that I want to read today, and I'll lead you through some of how I process that information. The second thing we do is once we have our paper and once we have our notes, we could import that into Notebooklm, which is one of the tools that you have access to, in order to chat with your paper. That's the sort of second step. How do you chat with your paper and ask your paper questions? And then the last thing that we're going to do, once we have an understanding of what our paper is saying and what we want to get out of that literature, we could actually use Notebooklm's features to find more literature. And we're not going to do this in an automatic way. We're actually going to try to find some papers that relate to what we are interested in. We're going to try to find some papers that don't support what we're interested in. We're just trying to build a holistic view so that this chatbot that we're interacting with is going to be the most useful and unbiased research partner possible. So let's start off with actually finding a paper. For this process, we're going to start off with a paper that you're interested in reading. This could be in your field. This could be one that you've been wanting to read. This could be a paper that you found that is related to something you want to do in the future. But go ahead and go find a paper. So I usually use Google Scholar to find papers that I'm interested in. And I've already downloaded the PDF I want to read today. This is Investigation of the Rate-Mediated Form-Function Relationship in Biological Puncture. And so this is a topic that I'm interested in. It's biomechanics. It's really, really fast biomechanics, but it's not a paper that I've read yet. And so actually the first thing that we're going to need to do is read the paper. At least read the paper as much as you can understand. I think the most important things you can pull from this paper are what you're interested in, what the paper is testing, what the paper found, maybe a couple of notes of like your understanding of why this is important. And this is really important because we're going to feed our notes along with this paper to artificial intelligence. So if artificial intelligence can use a transformer to recognize what we think is important, it's more likely to give us results that are in line with what we really care about. Because when you're reading a paper, you usually don't care about 100% of the stuff that's in there. So this is our way to narrow down the scope of the paper and make it more useful to us. The easiest way to do this for today's demonstration is actually if you open up your Google Drive. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click somewhere in here and I'm going to make a new Google Doc. And so here's a new Google Doc where I'm going to use to take notes. And I usually have this side by side next to my paper so that I can take notes while I read it. So I will always start off with copying the title. I think it's important that this document knows what the title of your paper is. And then we'll just paste that, fix the formatting a little bit. And I'm also going to, there we go, click on the title and then automatically renames it. And instead of title, let's just call this notes. So I'm going to go read this paper. I'm going to take some notes and then we'll come back to see what we do with this next. Okay, so I made it all the way down to the conclusion, and this paper has the methods at the end. I'm not particularly interested in the specific methods, and so maybe that's something that I'll read in the future, but for now, I just want to get an understanding of the paper, and here are the notes that I've taken. So for example, this was in the introduction. This is something that was stated very early on. It just helps me frame in my head what we're looking at, that biological materials are going to become stiffer if you stretch them or punch them or puncture them at a faster rate. That was an important point that I wrote down. This again was from the introduction saying like, okay, well, what have other studies done in the past? I wrote down the major hypothesis. This isn't all of the hypotheses that were tested in this paper, but the one I'm interested interested in the most. And then I gave a little summary of one of the figures. I thought this data figure was really important, and I actually spent most of my time studying and reading and understanding this paper, looking at this figure. So here are just kind of my takeaways from that. As you can see, right, like I'm not taking that many notes. These are just like big ideas, big themes that I really want to remember and I really want to focus on in the future. Okay, so now that we have our first paper that we have read through, and now that we've taken some minimal notes, now we can actually move to Notebooklm to kind of put this together into a chatbot using that RAG system, the Retrieval Augmented Generation. So to do this, we're going to want to go to notebooklm.google or notebooklm.google.com. It should look something like this, and actually it might say even like try Notebooklm. And you want to click that button and you'll get something that looks like this. Here we can create a new notebook. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to upload that PDF. So I can drag and drop that PDF onto here, but I'm just going to click choose file. Then I can just navigate to where that file is on my computer. It's just in this folder here. That's the PDF. And so I'm going to open it. And once I do that, you'll see that it uploads to the left-hand side. The left-hand column of Notebooklm is where you're going to have access to all of your sources, and you can add multiple sources. You could add PDFs, you could add web pages, you could add Google Notes, which is what we're going to do in just a second. But this is the information that Notebooklm can retrieve to augment its generative responses, right? This is where it's going to look at some of the sources. And so why don't we do that? Let's just click on add to add another source over here. And this time I'm going to go to Google Docs and I'm going to add my notes that I made in Google Docs. So I selected the file that had my notes. And again, if we actually click on it, you can see what was stored. So here is my title. Here are the notes that I wrote down. Everything looks good. So now that we have our sources in there, right? We have our paper as a PDF. We have our notes as a Google Doc. You can actually go to this middle section, which is a chat bot that is going to answer the questions that you have based off of the information that you added as a source. We can even see there's some suggested questions at the bottom over here. How does puncture speed influence the relationship between tool sharpness and penetration depth? So you can start with some of these suggested questions, or you can just ask your own. And the first thing that I like to do is summarize the most important aspects of this paper in 3 bullet points, right? You could just ask for it to summarize, but it might give you like a whole long document. Forcing Notebooklm to give you 3 bullet points really tries to make it as concise as possible, which is what we want to start with. So if I put in this prompt and I hit enter, or I click this blue button, we'll give it a second to think through this. But here are my 3 bullet points, right? The study addresses a gap in understanding of how the shape, sharpness of a biological puncture tool affects its performance across a wide range of speeds. And here's one of the best parts about Notebooklm. Do you see this little circle with the 1 over here? That actually shows you where in the sources it's pulling that information from. So this is a way that you can very quickly check the accuracy of what is being generated. So if I wanted to see, okay, I hover over and it shows me which document it's pulling it from, which is just the paper. And if I actually click it, you'll see that, okay, it's pulling this information from the abstract. If you want to double check what's going on, and you should always do this, you could reread exactly what was located in the paper, or even open up the PDF again and find it and reread it, or double check your notes just to see, is that accurate, or is the AI chatbot making stuff up? Now, because this is using RAG, because this is using Retrieval Augmented Generation, it's less likely to hallucinate, but it doesn't eliminate it completely, right? There's still a chance that it's completely lying to you, completely making stuff up. It is absolutely your responsibility and your job to make sure that what you're getting back is accurate. Okay, so you can see, if we see the second part, while most previous puncture studies focus on low speeds, biological systems typically operate at very high speeds. That is an important point. If I hover over 2, you'll see that it's actually taking it from my notes. So it's recognizing that I thought that was important. That was a bullet point that I pulled out. So If we didn't include our notes, maybe it wouldn't have picked up on this, but because we included it and we kind of said that like, hey, this is important to me, that increases the chances that it's going to show up in a summary like this. And as you can see, it is a very quick way to look at the 3 major points of your paper and to kind of understand at a quick glance, what was this paper about? Why was this paper important? I will note that we are choosing both of these sources to ask questions of. So for example, you can see down here, it's going to be referencing these 2 sources. If I just want to reference the PDF, or maybe if I have 5 or 6 different PDFs and I only want to reference those 5 or 6 PDFs, you could sort of control what the AI is going to be looking for. But for now, let's just keep them all checked. So I have a couple prompts that I want you to try out, and you should try out all 3 of these. So one of the first prompts that I always ask is in 3 bullet points. Why are the results of this paper important? And so we can see 3 bullet points. Why is this important? It addresses a significant knowledge gap. That kind of information might be very important if you are citing this paper and you just want to remember what is the purpose of this paper. Well, they're addressing a knowledge gap, and you can very quickly see what that knowledge gap actually is, and then double check to make sure that all of these sources are saying what you think they're saying. Here we can see the findings have profound implications for the evolution of passive and low-speed biological puncture systems. Cool, that's great, that's awesome. And then we have here, conversely, the results offer critical insights into evolutionary adaptability. So again, 3 major reasons why this paper and why the results of this paper are really important. I'm going to show you one more thing that I like to do. If you want to save this for later, you can copy and paste this into like a Word document or a Google document, or you could click this button here that says Save to Note. That will basically take all of this text and make it into a side note over here on the right hand side, so that in the future, if you want to click it, there it is. It's all there for you. The reason why that's important is because if you were to close the web browser and get out of Notebooklm, this chat basically disappears. And so if you have some results from chats that you want to save for later, in case it's like an important thing that you want to know, make sure that you're hitting Save to Note. If you decide later in the future that this note really wasn't all that important, you could find these 3 vertical dots, click, and then Delete Note, and we'll keep that in there. So one thing that you can do is you could actually click this note and expand it, and in the lower left hand corner you could convert the note to a source. So if you wanted this information to be searchable and referenceable by the AI, if you want the AI to explicitly look through this text when you're asking questions in the future, you just click Convert to Source, and what it does is it adds that as one of the sources that you can now query from. It doesn't remove it from your list of notes, so that's always going to be there, but it is kind of awesome that you can basically feed that information back into a source and have that there for you to query in the future. So that is one prompt that I think is important for you to interact with. Another common thing that you do when you are reading literature is you try to figure out, well, what would you do next? If you were this researcher, if you were in this person's lab, how might you extend the study? So you could just ask the chatbot, in this study, how might I make an experiment to follow up on the results? And again, this isn't like perfect English. It's not crafting the perfect argument, but you're putting in the words to try to get the AI to understand what you want. And it does a really good job at taking whatever you type and finding the meaning of that and giving back to you an answer that makes sense. So let's try this out. Now you'll see that it's searching through these 3 sources, trying to generate some answers to our query. So here we go. Here's a follow-up experiment, right? And so what you can see is it lays out a very nice, clean objective. What should we do? It gives us a draft of the methodology. And what we can see is even some expected results and some alternative follow-ups. This is a really long document that has a lot of detail in it, but you can start to use this to pick apart the paper to try to figure out what was missing, what is the next logical step. So this is really important as you're trying to design your own experiments. I have one last prompt that's going to be very important for the 3rd step of this. And that prompt is, if I wanted to find more information on this topic, what do you suggest I search for? as you process a single paper and you start to extract the ideas and extract the knowledge that you want out of it, you start to wonder, like, well, what do other papers say? Right? How do I find more papers? Maybe if you're really familiar with that field, that's kind of easy for you. You kind of know what to search for, you know, like where to look. But in case you don't, if this is a completely new field to you, maybe it's good to do a prompt like this where we can see, okay, I have a term that I can search for, puncture biomechanics, rate mediated form function relationship, strain rate dependence on biological materials. All of this looks good. And so this is going to help us with the third phase. And the third phase is actually using AI to assist us in discovering more sources. We want to use Notebooklm to try to help us find more sources that gives us a more comprehensive view of the literature. And so to do that, we need an idea of what we want to look for. In this case, I want to look specifically at strain rate dependence in biological materials. Let's just start there. So I'm just going to copy that. And if you go to the left-hand side, there is a Discover button. So if we click Discover, you'll see there's a place where we can put in a prompt to try to find more papers. And so if I just paste what we had here, strain rate dependence in biological materials, and we can even just flesh the sentence out a little bit more, I would like primary literature on strain rate dependence in biological materials. Specifically, I am interested in, let's say, fracture, puncture, or protection. Those are maybe things that we're interested in based off of the literature. And so when we do that, we hit submit. It's going to take a while, but Notebooklm actually has access to the internet and will search for some primary articles. It's not super good at doing all of that. Sometimes it'll give you secondary literature. Sometimes it'll just give you blog posts, so you got to be really careful. But here we can see there's about, 10 or so different resources that it went to go find. Now, if you were lazy, you could just click import and it would put in those resources into your notebook. I'm going to suggest don't be lazy, right? We want to make sure that what we're putting into our notebook is of the best quality possible. Like, we don't want to put garbage in here. And so I actually click this button to remove all the sources, and I go one by one to see, is that a source I want to include? The first one is about modeling time-dependent damage and fracture. So like maybe that is relevant, but not quite what I'm looking for. What about this one? This is a website, different traits at different rates, the effects of dynamic strain rate on structural traits. This sounds good. So if you click this button over here, it's actually going to try to open the source in your web browser so that you can evaluate it to see, like, what is the source? Who's it from? Is it reliable? Is it one that you would read and want to add to your notebook? In this case, it is a journal article, so it is primary literature. It's free. Awesome. It's actually by the same author, which is also a good sign. And if we scroll down, we can see we do have access to the entire manuscript here. And so this looks like an excellent paper that I might want to read. And so what you can do is you could download the PDF and like do this whole process where we take notes on it manually. Or if we go back to our Notebooklm, we can say, yeah, that's definitely a source that I want to add. And as you can see, Notebooklm helped us find maybe 3 different resources. We can import that again, and if we're not satisfied, if we want to do some more searches, we can find another topic. Oh, how about this one? Tool sharpness and puncture performance. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a couple more of these and add some of these sources. Okay, I found a couple more studies. I added them to my sources list. They're uploading right now. And so I think it's really important to find papers that are related that could potentially support your argument, especially if you start to find papers from other systems or other organisms or different scales. I think it's really important to just be very holistic in your understanding of the field if you can, or at least get really, really caught up very quickly. And just finding a wide variety of literature on the topic can be very, very helpful. So how about we try to add some sources to our notebook that don't 100% support what we have found so far. So we could say I would like primary literature on examples of biological structures that are not sensitive to strain rate. I am interested in puncture and material failure. Let's just see. Maybe that's enough to get us some resources. Okay, so let's look at a couple of these papers. We'll unclick all of them, and we'll see ligament material behavior is nonlinear, viscoelastic, and rate independent, right? So remember, what we were looking at previously was rate dependence. So if this paper looks like it's good, primary literature journal biomechanics, this actually is what we're looking for. So we're going to go back and we're going to say, yeah, that is a source we want to include. And we can just go through and add a couple more of these. I'm just going to read through these really quickly to see what I want to add or what I don't want to add. Okay, so I added a couple sources here. We'll import them into our notebook. And then now that we have a bunch of these sources, right, some supporting our ideas, some that are not really supporting our ideas, I like to give one last prompt, which is, what are the arguments for and against strain rate sensitivity of biological materials? So again, we have sources that we know are going to include both. And if we just want to quickly summarize through all of these 18 sources, which of these are going to support rate dependence, which of these are going to support rate independence, we can have these nicely categorized in a nice view that we can look at very, very quickly to try to understand the state of the field. So we can see here arguments for strain rate sensitivity. We can see a whole bunch of things: general viscoelastic behavior, strain rate stiffening and toughness increase, and then we can also just very quickly look at all the papers that this is pulling from and really reread those papers and make sure that they're saying what the AI thinks they're saying. And then we can finally look at arguments against or limitations of strain rate sensitivity of biological materials. So here we have some examples of some specific systems, some soft tissues, for example, that are rate insensitive. Here we have some more information about ligament behavior and shear loading. This is just a very, very quick way that we can develop our ideas of what supports what we think, what supports our hypothesis, what doesn't support the hypothesis, and sort of like what kind of experiment can we design that sort of sits in between, and what limitations do we have to deal with. Okay, the last thing that I want you to do, once you have played with this a little bit and added sources and tried to do this, and actually going to save this to a note, and I think when you do this, you should save it to a note as well. What I want you to do is to share this notebook with me. We actually now have a button up here where we can share publicly to anyone. Even if they don't have a Gemini Pro account, you could share your notebook full of your sources, full of your notes, and maybe even give access to this chatbot. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to click share. Here, what I want you to do is change from restricted to anyone with the link. And what you can do then is just copy this link, and then you can share that link to me on D2L onto one of the assignments, and that's what I'll do. I'll look at your notebook, I'll see how you interacted with it, I'll check out your sources, I'll check out your notes over here on the right-hand side, and that'll be like the major assessment for this week to see that we can actually use Notebooklm to do some really, really high-level literature review work. Okay, well that is enough for this video. Definitely take some time to play with this. This is a tool that we're going to be using a lot in the future, and I'm guessing you're going to be using it a lot outside of this class as well. Looking forward to seeing all of your notebooks, and I'll catch you in the next video.